Now in the next section, Paul goes on to describe corporate reconciliation between Jews and Gentiles. He first talks about the Gentiles' former state, which was isolation. He says, "You who are Gentiles used to be separated from Christ and called uncircumcised by Israel and foreigners of the covenant. But now, in Jesus, you have been brought near by his blood." He then describes the Gentile believer's present state, which is incorporation into a new spiritual community. He first talks about the peace which Christ accomplished in his death. He says, "Jesus is our peace, making the two groups one. He has destroyed barriers of hostility by using his own flesh to set aside the law." Now, Gentiles were allowed to enter the outer temple enclosure in Jerusalem, but were physically prevented access to the inner courts of the temple by a 4.5-foot wall, what Paul calls the dividing wall of hostility. This dividing wall had great significance for Paul, who was arrested in Jerusalem for reportedly bringing a Gentile into the inner court of the temple. Paul knew that Jesus' death and resurrection had in effect broken down the dividing wall in order to bring unity between the Jews and the Gentiles. Paul says that Jesus' purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, making peace. He reconciled in one body the two groups through the cross. The cross puts hostility to death. He came and preached peace for those far and near and gave access to the Father to both groups by one Spirit. Paul then talks about the foundation which Christ laid through his apostles. He says, "Because of all this, you are no longer strangers, but citizens and members of God's household. This house was built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus as the chief cornerstone that holds the whole building together and turns it into a temple in which God lives by his Spirit."